Welcome, dear viewers, to a world where darkness and mysticism meet in the creepiest forms. Here, in this abandoned corner of the internet, we will delve into the darkest corners of the human imagination. Prepare for awe-inspiring horror, as each of our stories is imbued with sinister secrets that lurk in the darkness of the night. Scary stories that remain beyond your imagination are waiting for you on our channel. Don't forget to turn on the lights, get comfortable, and hold on tight, because now we are going into the world of nightmares. Are you ready for it? Then welcome to our scary story.
In the chilly days of December back in 1986, our combat engineering battalion found itself deployed to the dense jungles of Honduras. Our mission? To construct a new airfield just north of the Rio Coco, a natural border dividing Honduras and Nicaragua. As a greenhorn on my first deployment beyond the familiar confines of the United States, the prospect of spending Christmas in the Central American wilderness was far from appealing. But in the Army, missing holidays and embracing risks comes with the territory. Little did I know, the risks awaiting in this less-traveled region of the Honduran jungle were of a nature I couldn't have possibly foreseen. Far more daunting than the threat of socialist guerrilla fighters. My name is Robert, and I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. What I'm about to share is a story laced with terror, a tale of an encounter with something they called El Diablo, shrouded in mist and mystery. The mist before you offers a choice, a passage through to the unknown, leaving you to decipher what's real as you tread through what we soldiers referred to as the fog. The 1980s were tumultuous times for Central America. Nicaragua, a country ravaged by a major earthquake in 1971, faced economic collapse, rampant government corruption, and a violent political revolution. This backdrop was hauntingly reminiscent of the recent war in Vietnam. The conflict had two primary factions: the Sandinistas, socialist rebels who had overthrown their corrupt government at the close of the 70s, backed by the Soviet Union and Cuba, and the Contras, counter-revolutionaries seeking to dethrone the now equally corrupt Sandinista regime, covertly supported by the U.S. as part of its wider strategy to curb communism's spread in Central America. This was essentially another proxy war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Displaced from their homeland, the Contras sought refuge in Honduras north of Nicaragua. The U.S. also lent support to the Honduran military, fearing a full-scale incursion. Our unit, the 27th Airborne Engineering Battalion from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, was tasked with building an airfield near the village of Hamastron, about 15 miles north of the border. This construction wasn't just a logistical move. It was a clear message to Nicaragua to respect the territorial lines. Although our unit was armed, we weren't officially at war with Nicaragua. Our orders were explicit: avoid direct combat unless fired upon first. Our role was primarily defensive, a stance reminiscent of the early days of the Vietnam War. While some of our battalion focused on the airfield, others, myself included, joined Honduran troops for border security patrols and surveillance. As a radio and communications specialist, I wasn't much involved in the construction. Instead, I found myself frequently patrolling the border, keeping an eye out for any enemy movement. Our visibility was limited, so we relied on reconnaissance from aircraft and reports from the Soto Cano Air Base, some 200 kilometers to the west. Real-time updates on enemy activities were rare, often reduced to vague sightings of suspicious vehicles or groups near the river. One morning, around 10:30, while out on patrol, we received a radio transmission about an unidentified vessel moving upstream. Our orders were to rendezvous at specific coordinates and then proceed on foot to the river, hoping to catch sight of this craft. We coordinated with other patrol vehicles, planning our approach to find concealed positions along the riverbank. The boat's movements were erratic, making it difficult to predict its path. Questions filled the radio channels. What was it? Were there people aboard? How many? The uncertainty added an eerie tension to our mission as we raced through the rugged terrain, past local villages and farms, to intercept this mysterious vessel. As we closed in on our insertion point, the tension in the air was palpable. We dismounted from the trucks, leaving 3 squad members behind to stand guard while 6 of us hastened down to the riverbank, a mere half-mile away. The terrain here was less jungle, more open grassland, allowing us to cover the distance swiftly, albeit through sparse tree cover. We soon encountered a cattle farm, navigating 2 stretches of barbed wire fencing before reaching an open field. Like many fields in the region, this one too was cleared for cattle grazing, with the river beckoning us from 100 yards across. Finding cover behind trees was challenging as the riverbank, cleared to provide cattle access to water, offered scant vegetation. We positioned ourselves 5 to 8 yards back in the tree line, meticulously out of sight from the approaching boat and anyone who might be on the Nicaraguan side of the river. "Come on, let's go." "Take cover, Robert," I was instructed. "Yes, sir," I replied, my heart racing as we split up for better surveillance. The boat, last reported heading west towards us, hadn't passed yet. We waited in anticipation. "Should be here any minute," I thought, as whispers crackled over the radio. "Do you see it yet?" came the question. "Yes, something's there. A dark object," I reported. "Could it be a log or a crocodile?" The tension mounted with every passing second. "Hold your fire no matter what," the order came. We held our breaths, eyes fixated on the water. The sight that emerged was beyond comprehension. "Look at those teeth," someone gasped. The creature, enormous and terrifying, seemed to be sizing up its prey. We were motionless, in awe and fear. Just then, the creature, a snake of unimaginable proportions, lunged at a group of cattle near the river. The sheer force of its attack sent several sprawling. Its speed was astonishing, especially given its size. It darted towards another group, causing a frenzy. The snake then reared its head, towering at least 2 men high, and without a moment's hesitation slammed down on one of the cows. The sound of bones crushing under its massive weight was sickening. Wallace instinctively raised his rifle, but Sergeant Perez signaled him to lower it. Firing at a creature that size would have been futile, perhaps even provoking it. It seemed to have noticed us before returning to the water, but its interest was clearly on the cattle. With a swift motion, it scooped up the cow, its head dangling from one side of the snake's mouth, the legs from the other, and slithered back into the river, disappearing from our sight. In the aftermath, we stood in stunned silence, grappling with the reality of what we had just witnessed. A desire to flee, to leave this country and its nightmares behind, overwhelmed me. Yet a twisted curiosity among us sparked a debate over the creature's size. Estimates ranged wildly from 50 to 100 feet. To settle this, 3 of us paced the distance from the riverbank to where the snake's head had been, counting steps: 31, 33, 34. Our calculations suggested a length of approximately 75 to 80 feet. The only cattle remaining were the injured, their legs likely broken. The possibility of the snake returning for them hastened our decision to depart. As we headed back to the trucks, a radio call inquired about the boat. Before responding, I consulted Sergeant Perez, who advised reporting our findings once we reached our vehicles. However, upon relaying our experience to Sotocano, we were abruptly instructed to maintain radio silence and return to base for debriefing. A sense of foreboding accompanied us on the long drive back. It was evident that our summons was directly linked to the extraordinary event we had just encountered, an event that seemed to transcend the bounds of normalcy and ventured into the realm of the unfathomable. Upon our return to base, the atmosphere was thick with apprehension. We were greeted by a large contingent of uniformed personnel, including a few officers, with a major being the highest in rank. Alongside them were 2 men in Honduran Army uniforms and an apparent Honduran civilian. Their stern expressions did little to ease our growing unease. The men maintained a strict composure, their faces betraying no emotion, as if preparing for a scolding that was all too familiar in military life. We exchanged worried looks, bracing ourselves for what was to come. One by one, our names were called, and we were led away. When my turn came, I was ushered into a car flanked by a lieutenant and 2 enlisted men. The drive, albeit short, felt ominously long, ending at a nondescript building in the rear area of the base, the furthest from the main runway. Inside, I was led down a hallway to a plain meeting room at the end, right side. Its starkness was notable. 1 door, no windows, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The setting was fitting for what seemed to be an impending interrogation. A table with chairs was positioned in the center, and at the far end sat another major, his demeanor as grim as the first. I was directed to sit opposite him, flanked by the other men. Silence filled the room, an unspoken tension hanging heavy. The major broke the silence. "All right, what happened, soldier? Tell me everything." As I narrated the events, he listened intently, insisting on every detail from the moment we left our vehicles to our return. I obliged, leaving nothing out, and as I spoke, the room remained still, the men motionless, their expressions unreadable. Upon finishing, I looked around, seeking any sign of reaction. The major's expression remained unchanged. He glanced briefly at the door behind me, then back at me. "Tell me what happened, son. I want to hear it all again. I think I missed something." His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried a weight that made me second-guess my own story. In the military, it's often the senior enlisted who do the yelling, the chewing out. But when a senior officer takes this approach, it's different. I hadn't erred, yet I felt like I was being treated as if I had. The major's manner made me question the veracity of my own words, though I knew them to be true. Was he suggesting I change my story? Did he know something I didn't? Was this a psychological tactic to coax a lie, only to then punish me for it? I repeated my account, identical to the first. Again, silence filled the room as I spoke. No interruptions, no questions. When I finished, the major leaned back, arms folded, his gaze intermittently shifting to the door behind me. The tension in the room was palpable, the uncertainty of what was to come lingering like a dense fog, leaving us in a state of limbo between reality and the incomprehensible. The tension in the room escalated as the major's frustration grew. His glares intensified, his tone sharpened. "Tell me what happened. I want to hear it all again," he demanded, his patience wearing thin. The pressure was mounting, and I was caught between fear and the need to stand by my truth. I wished we had never mentioned the snake, yet here I was, unable to change my story without contradicting the others and potentially putting our men at risk. For the 3rd time, I recounted the events, my voice steadier than I felt. The room fell into a prolonged silence after I finished, the major's gaze piercing through me. Abruptly, he stood and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Muffled voices echoed from the hallway, the major conversing in Spanish, albeit not fluently, with a Honduran officer or official. My limited Spanish picked up words like Rio Coco, agua, and comer, water and eat. Were they discussing the snake? The possibility of it posing a danger, even to us. When I heard El Diablo and Muertos, the devil and dead, repeated in the conversation, a chill ran down my spine. The Hondurans seemed to be doing most of the talking, with the major mostly agreeing. The mention of El Diablo several times over made me wish I understood more Spanish. The major returned, not taking his seat but standing, leaning over the table, his hands pressed down firmly. He began to speak, his voice loud and tinged with anger. For the next 10 minutes he berated me, dismissing everything I had said. He insisted we had seen merely a large anaconda, maybe 20 feet long, and what I had thought to be a cow in its mouth was probably just a dog. He laughed at the idea of a giant snake, accusing me of fabricating the story, saying it was more likely a clump of leaves and branches in the water. He warned that such a ridiculous tale could harm the U.S.'s diplomatic relations with Honduras. The major then implied that insisting on a 75-foot snake could lead to severe consequences. hinting at charges for falsifying an official report, or worse. Though he didn't explicitly mention a court-martial, the threat was clear. I felt cornered, my integrity challenged. He concluded by calling me stupid, urging me not to throw away my career over this. As he sat down, the room's focus shifted to him. Everyone seemed shocked by his outburst, but no one spoke for a long while. The air was heavy with disbelief and a sense of injustice, yet bound by military protocol, we all remained silent, absorbing the weight of his words. The major leaned forward, his expression stern yet expectant, as he repeated his earlier directive. "One last time, tell me what you saw." The room was silent, every eye fixed on me. With a heavy heart, I echoed the narrative he demanded, recounting that we had seen nothing more than logs and brush in the river and a regular snake dragging away a small animal, perhaps a rabbit or an unfortunate dog. Even as I spoke these words, a part of me recoiled in disgust. I was betraying the truth to save my career, and it sickened me. I finished the fabricated story, my gaze falling to the table, feeling the weight of the lie heavy on my conscience. The major's demeanor shifted, almost relaxing into a semblance of satisfaction. He stood, thanked me for my cooperation, and left the room nonchalantly. As he walked away, I overheard him mention something about audio tapes, which only added to my confusion. The lieutenant finally broke the silence, asking if I felt better now. His question felt hollow, and I could only muster a shrug, my mind racing with questions about what would happen next, to me and to the truth we had witnessed. I was escorted back outside, driven to the initial stop on the base, and informed that I would be returned to our camp at the airfield. The instructions were clear. Do not discuss the incident with anyone, including those I had been with. Isolation seemed to be the order of the day. As I boarded the vehicle alone, a sense of foreboding overwhelmed me. At 21, thoughts of never seeing my family again, of being taken somewhere else instead of the camp, crossed my mind. Thankfully, I was taken back to the airfield. Upon arrival, I was escorted to my quarters, where for 3 days I was confined to the routine of sleeping, eating, and showering, barred from any work or leaving the camp. Finally, I was driven back to Soto Cano and put on a plane to Fort Bragg. Among the few on board was a Honduran soldier, a sergeant, who approached me after takeoff. In a hushed tone, he spoke of the devil along the Rio Coco, suggesting I was lucky to have escaped its hunger. His words, while unexpected, didn't entirely surprise me, given the rumors that likely circulated about our encounter. Yet, my paranoia, fueled by the recent events, kept me silent, wary of any trap that might lead me to disobey orders. The sergeant made the sign of the cross and returned to his seat, leaving the rest of the flight uneventful. Upon my return to Fort Bragg, I sensed a change in the atmosphere. It wasn't overt shunning, but there was a subtle shift, as if my command had been informed of the incident. A month later, I found myself transferred to Fort Campbell in Kentucky, conveniently close to my hometown in Tennessee. The move, though unexpected, was a silent reminder of the encounter that had altered the course of my military career and left me wrestling with a truth too strange and too dangerous to acknowledge. My sudden transfer to a new unit after only 2 years with my first command struck me as highly unusual. Typically, such moves occur under specific circumstances like harassment or assault cases, where a fresh start elsewhere is needed. The fact that my new posting was close to my hometown in Tennessee only added to my suspicion. It felt like a subtle gesture from my previous command, a quiet thank you for complying with their orders and keeping silent about the incident. Moreover, being allocated a small apartment of my own instead of the standard barracks accommodation raised further questions. Was this another favor? Or perhaps a precaution, ensuring I didn't share my extraordinary experience with a roommate? At Fort Campbell, I encountered more oddities, though none as profound as the giant snake, or El Diablo, as it was referred to. Over the years, my curiosity about this creature never waned. I delved into research, finding stories similar to mine and hearing rumors, but nothing concrete. Scientists had discovered fossils of massive snakes in Colombia, estimated to be around 40 to 45 feet long and living some 60 million years ago. These fins, unearthed during strip mining for coal, were fascinating, yet they were based on partial skeletons, mainly vertebrae, without complete skulls. While science provided estimates and theories, what we witnessed a few decades ago defied these explanations. The Honduran soldiers' comments on the plane suggested that the locals along the Rio Coco might still harbor fears of El Diablo. Their fears seemed justified, considering what we had encountered. As for the aftermath and the way my story has been shared, I understand there's skepticism. Some have accused the channel of clickbaiting or exaggerating tales beyond the realm of reality, but my experiences, as recounted, were true to what I lived through, no matter how fantastical they may seem. While my experiences were harrowing and beyond the ordinary, especially compared to my 8 years of service without witnessing anything remotely similar, sharing these stories isn't meant to harm. They are, in a sense, benign to those who hear them, albeit chilling and thought-provoking. My time in the military was marked by experiences that were far from normal, pushing the boundaries of what is typically understood or accepted in the realm of the paranormal. Although I don't claim to be an expert in these matters, my stories, as incredible as they are, represent a chapter of my life that remains as mysterious and unexplained as the day it happened.